Throughout history, there have been tales of giants, stories of colossal beings with strength and stature beyond human comprehension have permeated the folklore of nearly every civilization. These giants were often depicted as fierce warriors or divine beings, sometimes as protectors, other times as threats to mankind. But one of the most curious episodes in the history of giant lore comes from the southern tip of South America, in a region now known as Patagonia. There, in the winter of 1520, during one of the most daring maritime expeditions in history, a group of explorers encountered a tribe of indigenous people who would forever be associated with the legends of giants. The year 1520 marked a significant chapter in the history of exploration. A Portuguese navigator by the name of Ferdinand Magellan had set out on a journey to find a new route to the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. The spices, particularly nutmeg, cloves and mace, were highly prized commodities in Europe, sought after for their use in cooking, medicine and as preservatives. The Portuguese had a monopoly over the sea routes to the Spice Islands, but Magellan, driven by ambition and the support of the Spanish crown, sought an alternative path. His goal was to sail westward, through the southern tip of South America and into the Pacific Ocean, hoping to find a way to the Spice Islands that would fall within Spanish territory. Magellan's voyage was no small feat. The journey was fraught with danger, not only from the treacherous seas and unpredictable weather, but also from the political tension between the Portuguese and the Spanish. After a long and perilous journey across the Atlantic, Magellan and his crew arrived on the shores of what is now Rio de Janeiro in December 1519. They resupplied and continued south along the coast, eventually entering the Rio de la Plata estuary in modern-day Argentina. It was here that Magellan's fleet would encounter the indigenous people of Patagonia, marking one of the most mysterious chapters of this voyage. It was here, in the harsh cold of the southern hemisphere's winter, that the first encounter occurred between Magellan's men and the native people who lived in the region. The explorers were greeted by a group of tall, robust individuals who appeared to be giants when compared to the European sailors. Antonio Pigafetta, an Italian chronicler, and the expedition's official cartographer, wrote in his account of the journey that the crew's first sighting of a giant was so striking that they could hardly believe their eyes. The natives were said to be of such extraordinary size that they barely reached the waist of the Europeans. Pigafetta's description was vivid. This man was so tall that we could barely reach his waist with our heads. He was well formed, with a broad face dyed red, eyes circled in yellow, and two heart-shaped spots on his cheeks. The tall stature of the Patagones seemed almost supernatural to the sailors, who were accustomed to encountering indigenous peoples of varying sizes, but never anything like this. Their physical appearance, along with their strange clothing, made from sewn-together animal skins, only added to the mystique. The animal skins were described as coming from a creature with the head and ears of a mule, the body of a camel, the legs of a deer, and the tail of a horse. The giants wielded primitive weapons, short, thick bows and arrows tipped with stones, tools for cutting wood made of flint, that seemed both foreign and fascinating to the Europeans. The Spaniards were not the first to encounter these people, nor would they be the last. Over the years, other explorers, including English sailors like Sir Francis Drake, would sail through the region and offer their own accounts of the Patagones. Francis Fletcher, the chaplain aboard Drake's ship, described the Patagones as standing at least 7 feet tall, although this measurement was later disputed by other members of the expedition. Later still, explorers like Thomas Cavendish and John Byron would also report encounters with these giants, each giving their own exaggerated accounts of the natives' height, some claiming that they were as tall as 9 feet. The first encounter with the Patagones took place at the onset of the austral winter, which forced Magellan's fleet to spend several months in the bay. This extended stay allowed for more interaction between the explorers and the native people. Over time, the Spaniards and the Patagones exchanged goods, with the natives offering fur, food, and knowledge of the local environment in exchange for European products. However, it was the sheer physical presence of the Patagones, that left the greatest impression on the explorers. The term Patagones itself, which would later be used to refer to the entire region of Patagonia, was derived from the word Patagon, a giant character in a popular Spanish chivalric romance, Prima Leon, published in 1512. This literary reference to giants likely inspired Magellan to name the natives he encountered in the region after the character, who was depicted as a giant knight. Magellan's chronicler, Pigafetta, did not specify why the natives were referred to as such, but it is likely that the size and strength of the Patagones, as well as their imposing presence, were factors that fueled the myth of the giant tribe. The legends of Patagonian giants would not end with Magellan's account. Over the centuries, the stories would grow more extravagant, with later explorers and sailors offering increasingly wild and fantastical descriptions of the giants of Patagonia. The notion of these giant people living in the vast, remote wilderness of southern South America became firmly entrenched in European imagination. By the time of the 17th century, explorers from other nations, such as the Dutch and English, would pass through the Strait of Magellan and make their own claims about encountering giants. In 1598, the Dutch navigator Sebald de Weert claimed that the Patagones were so large that their tombs contained bones far bigger than any human had ever seen. In 1615, Joris van Spilbergen, another Dutch sailor, described meeting the giants and even claimed to have seen some remains of their gigantic ancestors. Similarly, English explorer William Adams, known for his travels to Japan, described the Patagones as exceptionally tall people, though he offered no specific measurements. Over time, it became clear that the reality of the Patagones was less fantastical than the stories suggested. In the 19th century, Charles Darwin, during his own voyage aboard HMS Beagle, observed the indigenous people of Patagonia and noted that while they were certainly taller than the average European, they were not the towering giants that had been described in earlier accounts. Darwin reported that the Patagones were robust and well built, with men typically standing around 6 or 7 feet tall, though some individuals were taller. These measurements, though impressive by the standards of the time, were far from the exaggerated heights reported by earlier explorers. The myth of the giants persisted, however, fueled by the remote and mysterious nature of Patagonia itself. The isolation of the region, combined with the harsh climate and the indigenous people's distinctive lifestyle, allowed the legend of the giants to thrive. Today, the Patagones are generally identified as members of the Tehuelche tribe, also known as the Aonikenk, a group of nomadic hunter-gatherers who inhabited the vast southern plains of Patagonia.